It's possible that someone has just proven that they are the best solo queue player in the entire world. And it all started at the start of Split 2 when all the ranks were reset. Players from all around the world traveled to Korea with one goal in mind: get the highest rank possible and prove how great they really are. It's really not an exaggeration when we say this was likely one of the most difficult challenges in the history of League of Legends when it comes to climbing ranked solo queue. I want you to imagine you're playing in Korea, the region with the reputation of having the highest skilled players. At the same time, all the best players from every other region have now traveled across the world for the singular purpose of trying as hard as they can to climb. Well, one of those players who traveled all that way to Korea goes by the name of Agurin, and he was able to hit rank 1 on the Korean server, which many are saying is the first time in the history of League of Legends that a Western player has ever hit rank 1 in Korea. Here's the thing though, that's not the craziest part about Agurin's story. You see, prior to him starting his Korean climb, many players vocalized their doubts of him having any success at all. And this is all because he has a very unique playstyle that many were arguing would be too passive for the aggressive Korean server. Well, in today's guide, we'll be breaking down Agurin's playstyle, the techniques and tactics he's using to stomp solo queue, all to teach you, the viewer, how to apply them in your own games to start gaining that sweet LP. And speaking of which, one of the biggest pieces of feedback we get from you guys when making a guide like this is that sure, maybe what you're teaching will work for Agurin in High Korean Challenger, but it's not going to work in my games where, you know, little Timmy XX69 the Yasuo main is running it down once again. Well, guess what? We not only listened, but we actually kind of agree with you. That's why we created an entire course where we show you how to apply Agurin's playstyle in low to mid elo where you have terrible teammates. This course is truly massive. It has 20 unique guides teaching you the secrets to climbing in these lower ranks you simply won't find anywhere else. Trust me, I already know halfway into this guide what you'll be thinking. Oh look, Agurin's full clearing again. If I did that, all my laners would have died 5 times, all while flaming me in chat. Well, that exact scenario is literally what the first guide in the course covers. It's called the 14-minute breakpoint and teaches you how to overcome it. We've even included full games with live commentary where I was sent to bronze, gold, and platinum to then show you in real time how to use this strategy to win when teammates are actively trying to lose. You can learn more at the end of this guide or click the limited time discount link in the description below to check it out. Alright, now to start, we need to first establish what is Agurin's playstyle as well as cover some of the drama it created. Many of you watching are probably aware of the proactive versus reactive memes by now, but if you aren't, let's give you a quick recap. It primarily started when the streamer and high elo jungler Dantes said this on his stream.
What you have to understand is when it comes to jungling, there are 2 types of playstyles they can have. Proactive and reactive jungling. Agurin, I will tell you right now, is the best player on the planet when it comes to reactive jungling. He's the kind of guy where he doesn't force plays of his own. He just responds to what the enemy jungler does and maximizes the amount of gain that he can make from that, okay?
This clip basically went viral and Agurin himself reacted to it.
Okay, wait a second. Just because he made a very big mistake and I punished his mistake, it doesn't mean that I'm forcing things. For me, I only force high percentage plays and not bad plays. I just don't do 30-40% plays. That's the thing. It doesn't have to be reactive or like. You have to differentiate between what is a good play and what is a bad play, and not between what is active, what is proactive, in my opinion. A bad play is not good just because it's a proactive play. It doesn't make the play better just because it's proactive. The best play sometimes you can do is not making a play.
Many other well-known high elo players and coaches also gave their opinion on the matter, such as Coach Eags.
And like Agurin said, there is not proactive or reactive. And lots of people talk to me about like aggressive, defensive. To me, that is nonsense as well. Those are just descriptive words. I'm not thinking, oh, we've got to be aggressive here. We've got to be defensive here. I just look at the minimap, take into account the time and probably the history as well. So what the enemy jungler's done and what laners have done and what's probably going to happen in the future, right? Because to know the future, we have to know the past. That's why we have to look at buffs. When the enemy jungler shows what buffs they have, how much CS do they have, therefore what camps have they done. And that will probably dictate what they're going to do in the future, right? All I'm doing, man, is taking into account all of those conditions and putting those conditions into the best decision possible that revolves around you gaining and potentially your team as well. I mean, your team gains if you gain, right? But you gaining as a jungler and this person, the enemy jungler, losing.
Coach Kirei also gave his opinion on this.
I think that the reactive versus proactive meme is kind of funny, but there's so much more than reactive jungling or proactive. And first of all, I don't think that exists. I just think it's a good or bad place.
And of course, the esport athlete himself, Midbeast, gave his opinion.
A lot of the criticism for this play has come out from Dante saying he's more of a reactive and not a proactive jungler. Dante said the proactive junglers are the best junglers in the world, but Agurin is a very consistent jungler. He actually, when I watch him, he's farming a lot. He's never taking risky plays. It's always just guaranteed plays, or he's making sure to get camps, get side waves, in order to get levels and guaranteed plays. And over a long period of time, he consistently wins games.
Now, here's the thing. I didn't show you all those clips to try and prove whether reactive versus proactive jungling is better, or whether it's even a thing that exists. Instead, the whole point is that what everyone does agree on is that Agurin has a very risk-adverse playstyle. He only commits to plays that have a high percentage of working out in his favor. Ironically, this is actually one of the best jungling playstyles when it comes to low to mid elo as well. In fact, we've actually previously created an entire course on what we call the 80% rule, which explains how after analyzing hundreds of low to mid elo junglers, the biggest mistake holding them back is that they were forcing low percentage plays. The entire idea behind the 80% rule is to only react to plays that will work 80% of the time or higher. And so this is what we believe to be truly amazing about Agurin's playstyle. It not only works in literally the highest level of solo queue, but it's also a fantastic way to approach jungling as a beginner to intermediate. And so in this guide, we're going to go through the core lessons taken from Agurin's games that we believe will improve the average player the most. To begin, we'll be covering one of the most important skills to have as a jungler, how to determine whether a gank is worth it or not. Here we see Agurin on Jarvan, beginning at his blue and pathing towards bot. Now, let's fast forward until the end of his route when he's finishing Krugs. If we take a look at bot lane, what do we see? We see two enemies completely pushed up and overextended. Most beginner to intermediate junglers would see this as a good gank opportunity. After all, we just finished clearing all of our camps and are level 4. However, there are several different issues with doing this. First, from the start of the game, we could see the enemy bot lane didn't leash, while the enemy top arrived late, meaning Kha'Zix started at his red buff and is also pathing towards bot lane. Secondly, both enemies have all their summoner spells available. Thirdly, both enemies are near full health. And fourth, we don't know if the bot lane has place down wards that would spot us. If after finishing our Krugs we decided to gank bot, well, the enemy Kha'Zix would be in the area. The enemy could have it warded, giving him time to prepare to counter gank, and the bot laners have high health and summoner spells, allowing them to buy time for Kha'Zix to counter gank if Agurin tries to force a gank. The first lesson here I want you guys to take away from this is that most junglers completely overvalue an enemy being overextended and pushed up the lane when it comes to ganking. Sure, when someone is pushed up it means a gank is possible, but it doesn't automatically mean a gank would be successful. You have to realize the most important thing to value as a jungler is your time. You can't spend your time on things that don't give you some sort of return on your time investment. This is why Agurin knows to immediately recall and head topside to get the scuttle there. That's gold and XP we would have missed if we forced the gank bot. And because of this extra time he has from not forcing that gank, he's able to steal the enemy's Krugs, into then laying a very nice trap at the enemy's Raptors, where he's able to not only steal them, but also chunk out Kha'Zix. Let's quickly see another example of this concept. Here, Agurin is on Jarvan and is on the second rotation of his camps at his Krugs. If we check top, we can see the enemy Aatrox is incredibly overextended, and yet Agurin will choose to ignore him and instead continue pathing towards bot. Why is this? Well, it's the same reasons as before. Aatrox has all his summoner spells up, he's near full health, and we don't know if Aatrox has placed down a ward that would spot us early. Compare that to the guaranteed gold and experience we have if we just continue pathing bot side as our camps respawn. Similar example later on in the exact same game. Agurin ganks mid, and we actually see the enemy jungler, Silas, run off to his bot side jungle. Agurin then goes to his Krugs to farm, and if we look top, we can see once again that Aatrox pushing aggressively. As we get to our red, we can even see Aatrox is literally at the tower. He couldn't be more overextended. And yet, Agurin will ignore this. Why? Well, it's the same reasons. Aatrox is near full health, he has all summoner spells, and he could have wards down. However, more astute viewers may point out that this time we don't have to worry about the enemy jungler counter ganking, since Silas showed heading bot side. The thing is, if we look at mid a few seconds ago, we can see the enemy mid laner, Qiyana, actually has mid priority, pushing the wave first and pinning down Kassadin. And sure enough, a few seconds later, we can see Qiyana topside, showing that if Agurin would have forced that gank, it would have gone horribly wrong. Basically, Basically, when evaluating whether a lane is gankable, there is a list of things you have to analyze. The enemy's position in lane, their health, their summoner spells, whether it's warded, can someone counter gank me? Most junglers make the mistake of placing the positioning in lane above everything else, when in reality it's probably one of the least important things. And so naturally, a question you might be asking is, out of that list, what does Agurin value the most? Well, after analyzing dozens and dozens of his replays, there's mainly two things he will consistently value. The first one is health levels. For example, here we can see Agurin on Jarvan. If we take a look at mid, we can see Qiyana is low on health, and so he makes the choice to gank it. The second thing he values is something we haven't mentioned yet, and it's if the laner is in what we'll call a forced position. In the previous example, you can actually see how Qiyana's wave is pushing. She can't just leave the lane, or her minions will continually kill the enemy's minions, denying her farm. This means Qiyana is forced to stay in lane and finish pushing the wave to the tower so she can recall. She's going to have to stay in lane overextended, low on health, while likely using spells to either push or trade with Kassadin. So you can see how these two elements, the enemy being low on health while also being in a forced position, leads to a very high probability the gank will be successful. Now let's jump ahead a bit. Remember that top lane matchup Agurin has been ignoring the entire game? Well, as he's heading to his Krugs, his top laner gets ganked, and take a look at the enemy Aatrox. Not only is he extremely low on health, but you can see his intentions of wanting to push this wave to set up his recall timing. This means he's low enough for a gank to always work, while also guaranteed that he won't just leave or suddenly recall, wasting our time. And I think that the following clip will actually perfectly highlight everything we just went over. So here Agurin is on Jarvan, pathing bot side. As he's clearing his wolves, he spots Gragas heading to gank bot on a ward at Krugs. Now, here's what's interesting. 99% of the time, I would expect Agurin to respond to this gank by stealing the enemy's raptors. Again, it's because of that idea of going for what is a guaranteed win over something risky. We even see Agurin spam ping assist on the raptors. However, once he spots Gragas commit to the gank bot, we see him actually pivot to counter gank instead. Now, before we see the outcome of all of this, I want to rewind a second to see this from Gragas's point of view. So it's around this point we see Gragas pretty much commit to a gank bot instead of farming his raptors. If we look at bot lane though, we can see both Xayah and Alistar have full health. Additionally, if you look at the wave, Xayah and Alistar aren't in a forced position. There's actually more blue minions than red, while it's slightly closer to the blue side, meaning it's going to slowly push towards them. Additionally, in this game, Gragas knows Jarvan started topside, and now we're in our second rotation of our camps, meaning Jarvan is pathing again towards bot. And finally, we have no idea whether this is warded or not. We just listed everything we're supposed to evaluate when it comes to determining whether a lane is gankable, and everything is telling us no. And yet, Gragas is going to force this gank. And surprise, surprise, it doesn't work. However, this still doesn't answer the original question of why Agurin is choosing to counter gank instead of stealing the enemy raptors. So let's go back. Let's pause right here. Remember those two things we just said he values the most: health and laners being in a forced position. Well, we can see Kai'Sa is low on health, and if we look at the wave, it's pushing, meaning they have to stay in lane to finish this push. And so finally, when Nautilus does land the hook and Gragas once again forces the gank, Agurin is in position to punish, focusing that low health Kai'Sa. And this concept of reading whether a laner is in a forced position or not isn't just for the enemy, it's also for your own teammates. For example, here Agurin finishes taking Dragon and then moves to farm his Gromp. If we take a look at his camps, we can see all of them have respawned. If we then take a look mid lane, we can see the enemy Viego is low on health, one of the most important qualities that determines whether it's gankable. We can see Sejuani is trying to gank mid in a ward. Sejuani is level 3, we're level 5. And on top of this, our mid laner is ahead in health. So you'd think the choice here would be to immediately run mid after we finish our Gromp. However, consider whether your teammate is in a forced position or not. The wave is currently even in minions, but is closest to Viego's tower. This means the even minion rule is in effect, meaning incoming waves will start damaging the wave sooner for Viego, causing it to push towards Yone. Essentially, Yone is perfectly fine to just sit back here and let the wave push to him. And why is this so important? Well, Sejuani is currently investing time into this gank, and so if Yone plays safe, Agurin will get massively further ahead as he's farming the whole time. And in this game, like many of yours, Yone doesn't play safe despite being able to, and so gets punished. And this is so important to understand, as this is a core part of Agurin's playstyle. He had a choice between two options: the guaranteed golden XP from his camps, or a counter gank that may have been a waste of time. Keep in mind, the enemy could have had a ward that would spot him, and then Sejuani backs off. Sejuani could have just decided to back off regardless. Yone could have just inted anyways before Agurin was even in position to counter gank. And Sejuani could have not even gone for the gank, and instead just helped Viego push the wave to create a recall timing for him. The point is, Agurin can't predict what will happen, but he can predict he will gain a ton of gold and XP from his camps. Just as importantly though, is he knows that Yone can just play safe for a couple seconds, and everyone's perfectly fine. And I know, some of you are probably thinking, no, none of that is true. I know Agurin, he's just default full clearing and ignoring his teammates. Well, let's fast forward a bit to highlight why that's not the case. So here Agurin is finishing up his Krugs, and if we look top, what do we see? A full health Gwen, so obviously we don't want to gank that, and the wave is pushing towards Gwen, meaning she isn't being forced to stay in lane. And yet, despite this, Agurin is going to decide to move towards top lane. Doesn't this just contradict everything we just went over? Well, no. If we go back to when his Yone inted, notice how Sejuani disappears into the top side of the map. So, as Agurin is pathing topside, he knows the enemy jungler is here too. In fact, we can even see him spam back pings, letting his top laner know. This is different in 3 key ways to the Yone scenario we just went over. Firstly, Aatrox is in a forced position. His lane is pushing, so he has to finish clearing this wave and shove it into the tower so that he can then recall or play safe as it rebounds back to him. Secondly, all of his minor camps are down, meaning he's not giving up that guaranteed gold and XP if he reacts. And thirdly, this is a new concept, but he has a guaranteed number advantage. Notice how his mid laner Yone has lane priority and will be at any potential fight's top lane first. This is why Agurin takes the time to hover on his Aatrox to protect him while he finishes clearing. And those guaranteed number advantages is something he highly values when it comes to making plays. For example, here Agurin is on Jarvan, leaving base. You can see how all his topside camps are alive. However, there's 2 enemies taking mid tower. Now, if you take stock of the map, Qiyana is currently dead, Aatrox is top, and Lucian is bot. What this means is that if he ganks mid here, the fight is guaranteed to be a 3v2 in his favor, which has a high probability of working out. Alright, now we covered a lot in this section, so let's just quickly recap the main lessons. One of the biggest mistakes jugglers make is they either overcomplicate their analysis when it comes to ganking, or they simply overvalue the wrong things, like the enemy being overextended. Instead, try to put far more value in the following. Firstly, the enemy's health. The lower they are, the higher the chance it's a good gank. 2, a force position. Does the enemy have to continue to overextend due to the wave pushing? This makes the lane state predictable, meaning it won't suddenly change by the time you get in position to gank. And this goes both ways, meaning sometimes your teammate is the one vulnerable and needs to be protected. And 3, number advantages. Realize if you gank a lane and there's no chance of the enemy counter ganking, that's actually a guaranteed number advantage. However, if the jungler is on the same side of the map as you, you have to assume it's going to be an even numbered fight when you do gank. When ganking side lanes, you also have to factor in the mid laner. Think who has lane priority, as this could mean even if the enemy jungler counter ganks, it would actually be a 3v2 in your favor since your mid laner could respond. Speaking of which, when ganking mid lane, you also have to factor in the side lane. Is top missing? Is the enemy support missing? This could indicate you're going to be the one with the number disadvantage. And finally, number 4, are there camps alive for you to take? If so, you need to be close to 100% certain the gank will work out. Otherwise, just continue farming. This is because you're giving up a lot more if the gank fails compared to if you had already cleared your camps. And that will be a perfect segue into our next section. But before we jump into it, I actually want to give you guys a sneak peek into the companion course for this guide, where you'll be taught how to use Agurin's playstyle in low to mid ranks. Let's jump into some in-game tactics that are especially strong in lower to mid elos. The first thing I highly recommend you use every single game is the Trinket Sweeping Lens trick. Prior to the 1 minute mark, place your Trinket ward on one of the enemy's buffs, then recall and swap to a Sweeping Lens. This Sweeping Lens will come off cooldown at the end of your route, giving you a higher chance of your ganks being successful. That's not the only benefit though. You see, this will give you guaranteed vision on where the enemy jungler starts. For example, in this game, I'm on Nocturne in low elo facing a Nunu. My early ward on the red not only spots Nunu's starting location, but it also shows him pathing bot side immediately after, meaning he left his Krugs up. The reason why this is so important is that I now know he's pathing bot side, which is what I'm doing too. So at the end of my route, I take a look bot and I can see that I lack lane priority. I can't gank them since they're not low in health, and Nunu will be in the area to counter gank me. At the same time, I can't go for the scuttle in the river since they can react before my bot lane. This is how I know the best choice is to recall, buy items, and head to the top scuttle. Now we get the top scuttle and spot Nunu ganking bot side. Great, we know from earlier he left his Krugs alive since he ran towards his Raptors after he did his red instead of pathing top, so that means we can steal them. And as we wait for his Raptors to respawn, we spot him ganking mid. Again, because we knew to recall earlier, we now have a huge item advantage in the form of 2 longswords, while the Nunu hasn't even bought items. So, as the enemy Nunu goes to farm his Raptors, he's in for quite the surprise, as we not only get an easy kill, but then steal his Raptors right after. I want you to keep in mind, this entire play was only made possible because I knew his starting location, which led me to making the correct decisions. Now, if you can't place a ward on an enemy's buff for whatever reason, then you can simply watch the side lanes as you do your first buff. Whichever enemy side lane arrives on lane the latest, 99% of the time, that's the guy who gave a leash to their jungler, so you'll know he started on that side of the map. Remember, you can unlock this entire course by clicking the limited time discount link in the description below. Alright, so let's get into the next section. Often, as a jungler, every decision ends up being a trade-off of some sort. The simplest example being choosing to gank instead of farm a camp. In order for that gank to be quote-unquote worth it, it needs to provide you with more value than the alternative, farming a camp. This is why when Agurin has camps up, he typically doesn't gank as much. It's because he has to give up more to execute that gank. An easier way of wrapping your head around this is to say ganking when you have camps up is innately riskier. Whereas when all your camps are down, you can actually increase your risk tolerance since you're going to lose less if it goes wrong. Let's jump into a game of Agurin's to show you what I mean. So here, he's finishing up a full clear, and as he finishes his blue, let's take stock of the map. Both bot lane and top lane aren't even in lane. And although mid is pushing towards him, Qiyana is full health and not exactly a good idea to gank mid when every side lane is missing. Remember, that's when you get counter ganked. So check out what Agurin does instead. He tries to sneak dragon by using the enemy's vision against them. If we swap to the enemy's vision, you can see how despite having the scuttle taken and a ward in the bot brush, he's perfectly dodged everything. Now, here's what's important to understand. Agurin would never choose to skip a camp in order to make this play. He'd be giving up far too much on such a risky play. But when there's no camps alive, his risk tolerance can increase, since if this doesn't work out, he doesn't lose as much. In the end, the enemy Braum spots him, he gets out, takes a recall he was going to do anyways, and still gets to his top camps right as they respawn. It's this period of time between when your camps are down to when they respawn is what we're going to refer to in this guide as dead time moving forward, just to make it easier to reference. So here's another example of this concept, but just much later in the game. Again, we'll see him full clear all the way to the top side of the map. And once again, he's finished his Krugs, he's now in his dead time. The main difference in this example is that Baron is still alive, so his risk tolerance is actually going to be a bit lower, since if he dies, it could mean giving up Baron to the enemy team. Still, notice how he can use his dead time to clear vision around Baron. He's even able to stick around to clear the second control ward that they place. And because he's timing all of these actions around his dead time, it means he's not losing anything for doing this. There's no trade-off occurring. In fact, it then turns into a winning fight shortly after, where Agurin's team is able to kill Sylas, Lucian, and Braum. And so with 3 enemies dead, including their jungler, it makes for a super easy Baron take. I mean, it's not like a Qiyana mid would steal it while Agurin's smite was on cooldown. In all seriousness though, trying to time things around your dead time is a very easy way to increase your efficiency. For example, here is Agurin again on Elise. He stops a Herald drop mid, and we spot the enemy Sejuani head bot side. We then continue our full clear towards top, and as we finish our Krugs, we spot Sejuani ganking bot. Now, if we take a look at our top lane, it doesn't follow a lot of the rules we established before. Gwen is full health. She's actually not only ahead a level on Aatrox, but is also ahead nearly 2,000 gold with a 350 gold shutdown. She even has her Ignite up, and it's not like she's forced into playing up the lane. The minion wave is actually even at the moment. Now, don't get me wrong, Agurin actually plays this extremely well mechanically, but he would never dream of ganking this lane if it wasn't during his dead time. And the primary reason this was even considered was the fact that we saw Sejuani bot side, meaning we knew we'd have that number advantage with no risk of a counter gank. There's actually even a more advanced way of doing this. So here, Agurin has recalled and is heading to his Krugs that have respawned. However, notice how the rest of his camps are still in the process of respawning. Most players mistakenly think this is the end of their dead time. However, more experienced junglers know that if you just straight up full clear, you'll actually clear too fast and end up waiting around your wolves or Gromp for a few seconds, just waiting for them to respawn. In these spots, specifically if that second camp still hasn't respawned, you can still treat it as if you're in your dead time. You can see how Agurin spots a Kayle pushed up, low on health and out of mana, and was able to get her flash before then heading back into his jungle to clear his camps that have now respawned. And it's actually quite important to understand that it's not just about playing like an idiot as soon as your camps are down. For example, here we see him finish up his wolves, and now he has no camps. However, if you take stock of the map, we can see Sylas is bot lane while 3 of our teammates are moving together topside. This means as long as we move with our team, it's guaranteed to be, at worst, a 4v4. At the same time, his Renekton has a big health lead in top lane, and in general, his team is ahead in gold, specifically his bot laners. It's not like he's now just going to look for any fight. He's only reacting to this because if a fight does break out, it's likely to go in their favor. You can actually see how Agurin reacts to things in real time. His top laner dies, and then he gets jumped by Sylas. Instead of turning on the Sylas, he chooses to run since they are now down in numbers. However, then once they see Jax teleport bot and Nautilus begins walking bot lane, they're back to having that number advantage. And he looks to immediately capitalize on this by forcing an engage on the enemy Gragas. So don't just think because you're in your dead time, it means you should force plays. Instead, think of it like it's time for you to fish for winning plays. Since your camps are down, you actually have time to poke and prod and be more patient, waiting for something good to present itself. You can see this exact same concept in action just a few minutes later. He's in the process of clearing his bot side. Take note of how while he does this, both his bot lane is pushed up mid and his Renekton is pushed up top. However, his Rumble is dead, while all of the enemy is alive, meaning if he tries to put pressure on the map with this team, it's always going to be a number disadvantage. So instead, he just clears, ignoring what his teammates are doing. You can even see his top laner die to the enemy jungler during this time. However, once he's done clearing his camps, Rift Herald has now spawned. Again, we don't want to force anything here, it's just that now that we're in our dead time, we can always play more patiently, fishing for a good opportunity. You can actually see how we spotted Jax having to recall right before this Rift Herald spawned. And meanwhile, both our Rumble and Renekton have teleport up, effectively making this temporarily a 5v4 until Jax gets here. That's why Agurin suddenly plays much more aggressively, forcing the objective, which then leads into some really easy picks for his team. Essentially, you want to think of your dead time as a window that increases your risk tolerance, since you're effectively risking less if you end up wasting your time. And there's actually one other trick that Agurin uses that allows him to gank lanes and pressure the map without having to give up farm in the process. In this game, we can see him dropping Herald mid. Now, 9 times out of 10, he'd leave as soon as he drops it to take his wolves and Gromp that are still alive. However, he has a timer on the enemy raptors. This allows him to stay in the area until they spawn. You can actually see him use this same trick shortly after. He has the timer on the enemy Krugs. So instead of heading back into his jungle or recalling, he can just wait for the enemy AD carry to walk back to lane and catch them between their tower. You can see how this wasn't as big of an investment as it seems, as he can then immediately pivot to the enemy Krugs nearby. Basically, you can use enemy camps as a way to play more aggressively while still being just as efficient. Now, as great as dead time is, there's actually a super important concept that will take it to the next level: reversing your clear. And big surprise, we have a shameless plug for you. We actually teach you this in the companion course for this guide on our website, skillcap.com. Let's check it out. Now, every game, you start on one side of the map and path to the other. This can often cause you to constantly be pathing in the same direction, as once your camps respawn, you'll end up starting at that same camp, pathing in the same direction again. Sometimes this can actually be a bad thing. For example, in this game, I start blue and path towards bot side. Well, later on in the game, I look to take Dragon during my dead time, but a ton of fights occur, causing me to take longer to kill Dragon. Now, after I recall, take a look at my camps. Both my Gromp and Wolves have already respawned. That extra time I took to take Dragon means I'm behind in clearing my camps. This will always happen every game at some point, often multiple times. In these spots, you actually have the option to reverse your clear. This is because by the time we get towards bot side, our camps will have respawned there, allowing us to start bot and actually clear towards top. You want to do this when reversing your clear will time the end of your clear with an objective spawning on that side of the map. For example, in this case, I go bot side to take Scuttle, then reverse my clear up to the top side so that I can be at Rift Herald right as it spawns. You can see how efficient this is, as I can now invade the enemy's jungle top side, get a pick on them, steal his red and Krugs, into tower diving topside, and then taking Scuttle into Rift Herald. Be aware of objective timings. If you're going to contest it or try and take it, well, you can reverse your clear a lot of the times to have insane gold and XP generation along the way. If you want to learn how to apply Agurin style of jungling in your own elo, then unlock the full course by clicking the limited time discount link in the description below. Alright, so as great as dead time can be, there's one exception that Agurin always follows, and that's recall timings. For example, here he's on Nocturne and is finishing up a full clear at his Crux. Now, based on what we just taught you, you'd think, okay, now he's going to run around on the map with his dead time. But no, instead he recalls. This is because he's sitting on around 1200 gold, which is incredibly significant for this early on in the game. To put it into perspective, his total gold is 2400, meaning literally half his gold is currently doing nothing. This is why he knows trying to use his dead time to impact the map immediately would be a mistake. He needs to hit this recall timing to spend his gold and get his item spikes. And if you don't believe me, well, take a look at what he does right after. He literally runs straight back to where he just was in order to contest the dragon. In fact, optimal recall timings often supersedes everything else we've taught you. For example, a few minutes later, he's clearing his Krugs into his red, and we can see his Wolves and Gromp are alive. However, again, he's sitting on 2k gold right now. His total gold is around 4800. Again, this is nearly half his gold, doing nothing for him. Usually, we'd expect him to full clear the rest of his camps, and then either pressure during his dead time or recall. However, the Rift Herald is alive, so if he continues to just farm, he's effectively giving it up, as he'd be incredibly weak with his unspent gold. This is why he's going to recall, not just spending the gold, but getting key item spikes, finishing his Stride Breaker and Steel Caps. He then runs as fast as he can to the Rift Herald, since if he catches Elise in there, it's a free kill, given how strong he is with his gold spent. And if you don't believe that would have happened, well, here he just casually 1v2s Renekton and Lee Sin shortly after. A more advanced way that he pivots from his regular pathing to a recall timing is actually due to distance. For example, here he's finishing up his raptors and his entire bot side is alive, but there's a scuttle top side that just spawned that he has to take. Notice how the distance from himself and his wolf camp compared to the distance from his base to the wolf camp is practically the same. In these spots, he just recalls, since he gets to spend his gold and get stronger through items while only being slightly slower since it's nearly the same distance from base. With that being said, whenever he has a big item spike due to a full item completion, he often will just clear one quadrant and then recall. You can see here, he's finishing up his wolves, and with his entire top side alive, ideally would just continue pathing top. There aren't any objectives he needs to be strong for or anything like that, and yet he's going to recall. This is because he had exactly enough gold to finish his black cleaver, and it actually makes a lot of sense why you should do this. It's not like clearing the remaining 3 camps would get him any closer to another item, and he'd still have to recall at the end anyways. By recalling as soon as you have your completed item, it means if anything needs your attention while you're farming your remaining camps, you can just pivot off it and respond with your massive power spike. Now, despite having us gone over quite a bit already, this next part is honestly one of the most important things for an average jungler to learn, and that's the fact that sometimes you have to gracefully just give things up. For example, here Agurin is on jarvan, he's clearing his wolves, and we can see Rift Herald is alive topside. As he clears towards topside, notice how he lacks lane priority in both top and mid. His support is recalling and his Kassadin is bot lane. In situations like this, there's nothing else you can do but give up the objective and take what you can in the meantime. In this case, it means finishing his Krug camp into soaking some lane minions top while his top laner is dead. Here's another example. Agurin is on jarvan taking Krugs and begins clearing downwards. Now, Rift Herald is about to spawn, but his mid laner has to recall. Meanwhile, the enemy mid is heading back to lane. This obviously means the enemy mid now has lane priority once the Herald spawns. So you can see how he just gives it up and continues farming. He looks for a play on the opposite side of the map, something we'll explain more shortly, but notice how he's not able to get much done. Graves shows up in time to contest the Krugs, and with him once again lacking mid priority and his bot lane needing to recall, it means he has to give up the upcoming scuttle spawn to Graves and just recall instead. I just don't want you guys to get the wrong idea that there's constantly a way to outplay the opponent. A very important skill is simply to know when to give things up and not fight over it. And with that being said, as we just alluded to, there is actually one main tactic Agurin will use when he has to give things up, and that's to look for a play on the opposite side of the map. For example, here we see a continuation of a clip we saw earlier, where Agurin tried to sneak the dragon and got caught and pushed off. He lacks both mid and bot priority, and so he has to recall. Knowing the enemy jungler is bot side right now, he now looks for a play on the opposite side of the map. You can see how he skips his Krugs, however, once he sees he won't get to top in time, he doesn't waste his time and just adapts and goes back to farming. Now, he continues his clear as normal, until he pivots to take the scuttle that's spawning, before then heading back into his jungle to finish his full clear. Now, as he finishes Gromp, again, Rift Herald is alive, and he's effectively giving it up to the enemy jungler since he lacks lane priority in mid lane. So again, he'll look for a play on the opposite side, in this case, ganking bot lane. However, they have it warded and just back off, and so he chooses to recall instead of forcing anything. Now, of course, I could have easily shown you examples of him making play on the opposite side and getting a bunch of kills and gold. However, the reason I wanted to show you these two clips is to highlight how sometimes even when you're playing perfect and even know to play the opposite side, sometimes there's still nothing for you there. So you really need to embrace this idea of knowing when you should give things up and move on and be more efficient with your time. And by the way, this concept of looking for plays on the opposite side isn't just for objectives like Dragon and Baron. You can see here it's early in the game and Agurin is taking the bot side scuttle. While doing this, he spots the enemy jungler ganking top. Now we know our response should be to look for plays on the opposite side since we can't respond to that gank. In this case, it means stealing the enemy's raptors, stealing their Krugs after, into hovering bot for a potential gank. But when that doesn't work, using that lane priority in bot and mid lane to then take the dragon. You can start to see just how much you can take with this tactic. For example, here he's finishing up his topside camps and pathing towards bot. As he finishes his raptors, he spots Gragas bot side. Again, we want to look for plays on the opposite side. In this case, it means ganking an overextended Jax top with no risk of being counter ganked, into then taking the Rift Herald. And speaking of the Rift Herald, often when he does take the Rift Herald, he will look to prioritize using it in mid lane, and it's actually for a very important macro reason. For example, here he's on Nocturne finishing his wolves, and despite having camps alive on the bot side of the map, he'll pivot towards mid since he sees a chance to drop Herald. This is not only important to do prior to the 14-minute mark in order to get the gold from plates, but just as important is the damage to the tower itself, which will help us take it down later on. Here's another example where within seconds of taking the Rift Herald, he's able to make a pick on mid, immediately transitioning into placing Herald to destroy the tower and take plates. And as mentioned, this is for a very powerful macro reason that will now be shown in the following game multiple times. So here, it's around 22 minutes, and notice how the enemy's mid tower is down. At the same time, Draken has spawned. Well, when the enemy has no mid tower like this, it allows you to push the wave much further up the lane, like so. What this does is pin at least one opponent all the way back to their second tower, as they have to defend the push so their tower isn't taken. And from there, you now have a really easy pivot to objectives like Dragon or Baron, where you can get a number advantaged fight. You can see in this case how Agurin even uses his Baron buff to make sure someone has to respond, and once two enemies show, it's an easy pivot into engaging on two enemies by themselves. Shortly after, they take Dragon, and again, with mid tower down, they can shove waves really far into the enemy's base, pinning them and preventing them from responding to fights. You can actually see how this creates an opportunity for Agurin to invade the topside jungle and collapse on the enemy graves. Notice how the enemy team has to take the long way around since they're pushed all the way to their inhibitor tower, and how awkward it is for them to try and fight here as they're being funneled through the terrain. Again, if we jump ahead, we can see Baron is spawning soon. Notice how we push that mid wave, which pins the opponent, gives vision of the mid, and then frees us to get vision control around Baron with a guaranteed number advantage. Now they'll have to face check into Fog of War if they want to contest Baron, and in the meantime, our LeBlanc can just continue to push the wave. This will not only pin them down, but if the enemy does try to contest Baron, she'll have a great flank on them from behind. Of course, we don't want to force anything, but if you see an opportunity to either drop the Rift Herald mid or destroy the mid tower early, it can often pay large dividends later on in the game by repeating this very basic macro sequence. And this whole concept of using minions to pin enemies down is actually something he does quite a bit as a jungler. For example, here he's clearing his raptors, he spots the enemy mid laner Qiyana ganking his top lane. Since his mid lane is in base, he responds by immediately pushing a wave to get damage on the mid tower and to force Qiyana to come back to mid to defend the push. Again, the next wave arrives, so he'll just continue pushing until Qiyana arrives. And now that Qiyana is pinned down by the wave, he can use this timing to run bot to gank since Qiyana won't be able to respond in time. Alright, now we went over a lot, and of course going over everything Agurin does to win games is beyond the scope of just one video. That's why we created an entire course where we show you how an average player can successfully apply Agurin's playstyle in low to mid ranks with terrible teammates. This course is absolutely massive with 20 unique guides teaching you the secrets to climbing in these lower ranks you simply can't find anywhere else. We even include full games with live commentary where I was sent to bronze, gold, and platinum to then show you in real time how to use this strategy to win when teammates are actively trying to lose. This course quite literally has a perfect 5-star rating from our subscribers. And if you don't trust them, well guess what? You don't have to. We believe so strongly that our service actually works that we've made it completely risk-free for you to try. If you don't significantly improve while actively using skill capped, then you'll get your money back, no questions asked. So you really have no excuse. Check it out for yourself right now by clicking the limited time discount link in the description below. And that will do it for this one. We here at Skill Capped want to thank you for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.